me again. It's the Professor of Nuttiness. It's the Nutty Professor. I'm back. Now, in the last podcast, we talked about language and thought. And I want to continue some further thoughts on that and some odds and ends and some things I thought you might find interesting. Now, I used to start each podcast with so many weeks clean. But in the last podcast, I discussed how I'm not that comfortable with words like falling and clean, and I'm trying to work on my own language. In the first series, I came up with PATAP, Personalized Approach to Addictions Process, and I have my own words for that, and I have point personification of it, so on. And now I'm trying to come up with words for alternative words. We considered portaling for falling, but over the last few days I've thought more about the issue, and I'm considering, instead of clean, maybe clear. So I'm now 8 weeks clear of all substances, even the lesser ones, the controlled burn ones, the drinking or whatever. So I'm now 8 weeks clear, Now that's one possibility. Another one I thought of is free of. And the thing about freedom is that I like it because it kind of gives you a sense of the compulsive nature of addictions. That when you're addicted to something, whatever it is, including, it could be buying cars, shopping, whatever, you are being controlled by something, you don't have the freedom, so it's a compulsion, and the thoughts, obsessive thoughts, lead to the compulsive behaviors. So I considered something like to be free of. Now, theoretically, if you get free of something, you could, occasionally have like a drink or something like that, because you're no longer compulsive. However, I do agree with the 12-step people that it's a very fine line. And I did talk to a rehab guy a couple of years ago who said that once you cross the line from recreational use to addiction, then the only way out of your addiction is complete abstinence. And that means for everything. I had discussed with him, I was using drinking as a controlled burn, and he said his view is he really does believe that once you've crossed that line to addiction, you can't go back. It's total abstinence, So, but still, in spite of all of this and the implications, I kind of like free of rather than clean. Now, there was another thing I wanted to bring up. For people struggling, or it warriors, whatever term you want to use, I won't use the 12 steps term of recovering addict, but in my framework, strugglers or warriors of it, there is something that happens quite a bit, and I want to include it in my system, and I want to come up with an abbreviation for it, and it's a close call. So close calls are, and you have a lot of them, and I came across a phrase that close calls only count in horseshoes. I think it's a game. I don't know much about games, but but you get points for close calls apparently in that game. You throw a horseshoe and it goes into a stick or something like that. But I'm not really very big on those kind of games. But you have a lot of close calls when you're struggling with something, So, and just for example, if let's say I have done this type of thing where I'm like I really want to go have a beer, and I want a beer, and I'm like going, and I'm sitting at home, and I put on my shoes, and I go to the bar, and then I'm going, no, I don't want to do this because it's going to open the door. It's my werewolf. It'll lead to this, it'll lead to that, and all that. So I go there, and I either turn around and I come home, or I sometimes walk in and have a Coca-Cola, have some wings, and come back. And I come home and I go, that was a close call, and you have quite a few of those. And as you are clear or free of for a longer period, hopefully the close calls diminish. They'll be like once a month instead of, once a week or once every 2 days, So, so I'm going to add that to my terminology. We're going to have CC. CC is going to be close calls. We're adding that to PATAP. Now, there's one other thing I wanted to talk about, and hopefully you'll be seeing a picture behind me. And the picture was sent to me by a friend, and it's of I think it's in the window of a gallery, and the friend was walking by and took a picture, and I think it's a painting. It's either a photograph or a painting, and it's David Bowie, a very famous singer from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and he had various personas. I've introduced you to the term persona in the previous series, and I have the Nutty Professor persona, and I've given you glimpses behind the persona at times in certain podcasts. But Bowie had several personas over his singing career, and he had names for them, and they went along with musical periods. So you had the Thin White Duke, and you had when he was the Thin White Duke, and then he was the Ziggy Stardust, and I think that was the name of one of his albums. Now the thing about Bowie was that he struggled with addictions on and off, for many, many, many years, and including cocaine, and at times heroin. And one of his very famous songs has a line which I've been told refers to, and it's a Major Tom, strung out in heaven's high. The Major Tom is supposedly, I think, heroin. So he struggled with a lot of addictions. Now, in the picture, you'll see Bowie wearing all black, like the Nutty Professor, I'm wearing my Nutty Professor t-shirt. But Bowie in the picture is wearing all black, a big black coat, and he has got a big black wolf, and he's holding it. And the big black wolf could be a very big dog, but I think it's actually a wolf, So there's this big black wolf standing next to him. And my friend took a picture and sent it to me because my friend has seen my podcasts. And he knows that in the earlier podcasts, I talked about, in my system of PATAP, I have a step, which is a personification of it, of the cravings of it, and I had personified my cravings as an inner werewolf. And in one of the podcasts, the last of the first series, I talk about the good wolf and the bad wolf, from a Cherokee fable, a Cherokee story, about a chief. So, and we see Bowie standing next to this big wolf, but, the wolf is under his control. He is holding the wolf like this, He's got him by the collar, and the wolf has been tamed, And my friend sent it to me because he said, I think you'll appreciate this, in terms of the symbolism. David Bowie, this very creative man who, a brilliant singer who fought addictions and, had all these personas, and, he seems to be saying, that if we take this symbolically, that he was able to control his addiction, his inner werewolf, So, that's that was one of the things I wanted to share with you. Now, this whole thing about my making up language, making up words. I'm not really the first to do this. A lot of psychologists, theorists, they like to, and I'm not putting myself in their category, but people like B.F. Skinner, the behaviorist, and he's the one who did experiments with pigeons and rats, and he was the one who didn't want to talk about the mind, didn't want to talk about thinking, wanted to talk only about behavior, stimulus and response, and reinforcement, positive, negative, punishment, all of that stuff. But he came up with, he didn't want to use terms that already existed. just like I don't want to use, falling or clean, He wanted new terms for his new science of behavior. So he came up with the term operant. There's actually no such word. He made it up. It's operate, because the animal operates on the environment, or the human operates to get a reinforcer. And behaviorism, it does work for certain aspects of addictions, particularly gambling, and it's been now incorporated into cognitive theories. You've got CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. So I'm not putting myself in the category of people like Skinner, but this whole making up words and coming up with words that are not already influenced, that already don't lead to certain thoughts. It's not brand new. I'm kind of borrowing this from others, Now, the last thing I want to do today is the topic of ego defense mechanisms came up towards the end of the last podcast, And in Freudian theory, the ego is weak because it has to deal with three things. It has to deal with the very powerful needs, wishes, drives of the id. I want it now! And the equally powerful prohibitions of the superego. You can't have it at all. It's wrong. And it has to deal with a third thing. The third thing is reality. Things you can and can't do. And in another podcast, I might talk a little bit more about, do maybe a whole podcast about the whole smoking and, the rules about smoking and how it's now become much more internalized than before, But we'll come back to that later. However, in Freudian theory, you have to, the ego has to protect itself. Otherwise, you would be overwhelmed by anxiety. Freud would say that anxiety is part of the human condition because there's all this conflict. This is, I want it now, you can't have it. I want it now, you can't have it. And then on top of all of that, there's things you can and can't do. You can't, there's reality. I want a brand new Mercedes, but I can't afford one. The things I want it, but I can't have it. There's reality. There's all these things. I can't afford these huge payments every month. So there's all these things. So we come up with these ego defense mechanisms. And, I'm going to be doing a car podcast contrasting my very old Mercedes with my friend's new one. And I was talking to my father about this, and he was going, well, our Mercedes is better anyway. And in a way, that's a bit of it. It's like, if we could afford one, we'd probably go and buy a new one. But it's like, instead of going, oh, well, ours is better, it's old, but it's got more style. It's got, you're coming up with a reason, You're coming up with a thing. Now, there's many levels to this. The biggest ego defense mechanism that applies to addictions is denial. Yeah. Now, denial, and that was first, coined by Freud. It was his daughter, Anna Freud, who packaged the ego defense mechanisms, and she put them all together, but her father came up with them. Now, denial is not allowing threatening information from reality into the system, because it's threatening, So there are two very big examples. One is addictions, and it's the first step. It's the first step for the part of the first stage for 12-steppers, is that you have to overcome denial. You can't, and a lot of people who are addicted but will say, I'm not. Say, I just have the occasional drink and I can stop it anytime I want, when they really can't, So once you have made that first, that awareness, you say, I think I have a problem. It's a big breakthrough, Now, the other big example of denial is in the theory of Elizabeth Kubler Ross. And she did a lot of research and theorizing about stages of death and dying. Death, dying, bereavement, grief. And her first stage is denial, because just a very, very simple, oversimplified example. Somebody goes to a doctor and the doctor says, I'm sorry to have to inform you, but you have, a fatal illness. Here's your x-ray, here's the test result. And very often the first response is denial. It's you made a mistake. It's not my tests, they got mixed up in the lab, it's not happening, something's wrong, you made a mistake. And people will often go and get second, third opinions, and then after the second, third opinion, it's like, I think I'm in trouble, so then you go into the other stages. I'm not going to go into them now, but people are familiar with, bargaining and anger and depression and acceptance, So that's denial, There's also rationalization, providing a reason for your behavior, but it's a societally acceptable one. And that can apply to cars as well. My father and I, when we discuss getting another car, and we're going, oh, well, it's better than, other addictions, and the cars, it might go up in value, and not the kind of cars we buy. I mean, if you buy like a $500,000 car, it might depreciate, but our cars all depreciate, So you're coming up with rationalizations, There's repression. Repression is keeping something in the unconscious. And projection. Now, projection, we may be coming back to later. I'm projecting my id impulses onto someone else. So instead of admitting that I am aggressive, I go, they're aggressive. I'm projecting it outwards. And it also plays a very big role in Jungian theory, because we've talked about shadow before. You project your shadow onto others. So there's actually 12 defense mechanisms, but these are the ones I want to deal with now. And to a certain degree, the 12-step people, they may say that, my coming up with my not agreeing with them could be seen as possibly my denying the true nature of addictions. Now, that's all we have time for today. So we're going to come back, some more language issues. We're going to talk about nutty, what does nutty mean, in the next podcast. So, from the Nutty Professor, okay, bye!